Hello and welcome to another episode of the Melanated Midlife Podcast. I am your host, Tequila Willery, and however you made it to see this episode, I am so grateful because you're about to hear something very special. And I will be completely just transparent that my guest today is June Hudson. And June Hudson and I are complete strangers. But I tell you how this came together. We actually met, we crossed paths in a local bookstore. And you're probably thinking, what's she talking about? Has she gone crazy? Why is she just randomly talking to people in bookstores and bringing them on here? Well, the reason that I brought June to this conversation is because in the bookstore, she was randomly having a discussion with several of us as we were standing in the checkout line about some of the things she's experienced with loss. And before you think, oh my gosh, this is going to be a downer, I want you to just hang with us in this episode because June's story of unimaginable loss with her loved ones, just people passing on from her family, her very close inner circle, she actually was able to talk through the experience of how being with them in their final moments, being able to sense when things were starting to decline. She was able to have very, very precious final moments with each one of them, well, most of them, and to be able to just come back and just be at peace in spite of all of the loss that had taken place. And then if you hang for the last few minutes of this episode, you're going to hear a very surprising twist to the story. In spite of all the devastating loss, she was able to bring all of that connection full circle and still be able to honor their legacy right now with all of us. So please enjoy my conversation with June Hudson as she teaches all of us about finding joy through personal loss. Hello, welcome everybody to another episode of the Melanated Midlife Podcast. We are here today with Miss June Hudson, and I'm going to let you look at her beautiful face for a moment while she's smiling, but she has quite a story to share with us. And I will say as a fun fact is that we really are strangers. We met, we did the whole brush shoulders with each other in a bookstore of all places. So this is very interesting where we are going to kind of discover together, but it was a conversation that June was having about her experiences with tremendous loss that really caught my ear. And so I asked her I hope the most non-creepy way, would you like to come and talk about it on my podcast? And by some miracle, she said yes. So here we are. So everybody that is listening to this right now, you are now caught up to this point in history. So June Hudson, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Yes, and thank you in general, because like I said, I tried to be not creepy with the whole invitation, but
It was
this
definitely not creepy.
is a pleasure to have you here. So for everyone that is tuning in, tell them a little bit about your background.
In terms of what we talked about at the bookstore or just
Mhm.
in okay.
Well,
So
I think because I talk a lot about being a Texas girl. I think they can hear that you are not a bona fide
now,
Texas girl. So give us some of that background.
well, my
It
back
doesn't sound like there's no gumbo or
oh, there's no
tamales or anything.
gumbo. This is all New York. New York every day. This is New York, New York. I just moved here to Texas in September. I was drawn here because my daughter who graduated from college, she went to LSU. Long story, she went to LSU, and when she was, about to graduate, she was like, I don't want to come back to New York." She was like,
Mm,
"I don't want to come back and have to live in my childhood home." And we all know because New York is so expensive, the likelihood of her ever being able to live on her own in New York was going to, was very small. And she's in the medical field. So Houston was just a no-brainer for her. So she decided to come here to Houston and work on getting her advanced degree. Of course, when I moved, when she graduated, I think it was like on a Friday. By Sunday, she moved here with her then boyfriend. And the last thing I said to them was, "Don't get pregnant."
I think every mother. I'm saying that all the time, even with my two boys. They're both away at college. I want to say that every time I talk to them. I don't want any grandkids yet.
Yeah. Well, for her, turned into that's exactly what ended up happening. Totally unplanned. Like, oh my God. Yes. So long story short, I have a grandson.
Oh,
And
congrats,
I
congrats.
yeah, it's been 2 years now, and I was back and forth to Houston so much from New York. I lived in New York my entire life. I'm, over 50 years. My entire I was born, raised, went to college, got married, lived there. I just moved from one county to another, but New York has been, yeah. And just coming back and forth and being that I was fortunate and blessed enough to grow up around my paternal grandparents. I knew the importance of having grandparents in your life. And then when me and my siblings, I'm the youngest out of 6 kids. So when me and my siblings started having children, all of us pretty much stayed in New York, and they got to grow up around their great grandparents
Mhm.
and and my parents. And my mom was the last one to pass, and she ended up passing like right during the pandemic. So for me, it was like staying in New York when my kids, my son also had made a decision that he was leaving New York and he was moving to Chicago. So it was a no-brainer. So for me, I stayed in New York because of family, mostly because my grandparents were still there, my grandmother, and my mom. I was never going to leave my mother. I didn't
Mhm.
live with her, but I wasn't going to leave because I knew that, it was just too important of a relationship and wanting to be close. And so I wanted to have that with my grandchild. And so
Mm.
I just made the choice to just come to Houston, and everything happened faster than I expected. But like I was telling you, I am a very spiritual person, and I am very in tune with God. I'm not a religious person, so don't ask me what church I belong to.
I understand.
I am a woman of God, God's child, and I listen, and I have a wonderful relationship. And he just made it so easy and effortlessly, even with all of my doubts about coming. Everything ultimately went so fast and so smoothly. Yeah, I ended up here in Texas and absolutely love it. I have no regrets whatsoever, and it has been such a wonderful transition moving here.
I am
So
glad to hear it. I'm glad to hear
yeah,
it. And
yeah.
in spite of the smooth transition here, the conversation that we initially brought us together, I
Hmm.
know that it has not been I don't even know the words, and I wanna be respectful to your story, but
Hmm.
you had multiple family members, close family members that you lost in a very short amount of time.
Yeah.
So, tell us the story of how this has all come to be.
Okay. I'm not gonna go back. I'll start with it goes back further than this, but I'll start in 2017 is where that was basically prior to that, there were some others, but that was the year that I really had to develop a different perspective on death, and I had on a different perspective on life in itself. 2017 in March, I was in Dubai on my dream vacation,
Mhm.
exactly, and I got a phone call that my brother passed away out of the
Mm.
blue. And, ultimately, the bottom line, it was one of those it actually turned out it was suicide. And it took me probably even now, it's hard to rationalize and to even admit that that's what it was, because when you think about, somebody committing suicide, this particular person, this brother, would have been the last person on the list that you would expect, to ever, go through that. And that is a very difficult death for me to talk about. It's it's something that I still have to work through because suicide is I it's a different level.
Mhm.
There's different levels of losses in your life. And I always say, like, one of the most painful things, or one of the things I never ever want to live without, and is my children. That's my biggest prayer to God, is to never let me outlive my children or even my nieces and my nephews. When you see a child, that's a hard one. Suicide is another one because the person left behind is left with basically the collateral damage of it. So the loved ones are the ones. So we, the siblings and everybody, we were the collateral damage of his suicide. And I know it's such a selfish act. And I mean, in not in a, I'm not saying it in an angry way, but it's one of those things is, you realize when somebody decides to commit suicide, they are singular in their thought in that. And they're only thinking about their pain and not even, and if they did think about what it would do to the people left behind, it may stop them from doing. But at that particular point, whatever pain or whatever they're going through, that's all that they can focus on at that moment, unfortunately. But we have, the loved ones were the collateral damage. And the collateral damage of that is so when I got that phone call, one was disbelief. And I have to say this too, as part of that too, because the biggest issue with my brother's passing also, and the reason why they had to contact me in Dubai is because I don't want to, a family member a close family member started posting it right
Oh,
away. And
on social media?
that's one of the, like literally started posting it on Facebook before the family could, tell everybody, i.e.
Mhm.
me, my children. So the biggest fear was it was like a debate of whether or not they should call me. But the biggest fear when they realized that I can still get access to the internet in Dubai, they was like, we gotta tell her because the last thing we want is for her to see that on
Right.
Facebook. And then the thing about it is my son, who was away at school at the time, he was going to school in Florida. That is how he found out about it. And
Mm.
it was just so devastating. I say that I mentioned that little piece because we're in this era where everybody wants to be the first to publicize or the first. Okay, everybody wants to live out loud. And I say that to say I think I just want people to stop living out loud so fast. Like, take a beat, take a breath. That's a prime example of stop living your life out loud. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be in real time, you know. But to go back to that, so that was my brother. That was like March or April. As I'm dealing with the grief of him passing, his death and so forth. I had already had fibroids, but one of the things is people don't understand is, or maybe they do, but you might know that grief can eat away at you. It can manifest physically. It's not just a mental state. So I think I was stuffing it down, my grief, that it manifested in a physical way. So I started having these major issues with my fibroids. I had already was having at this it got to the point where I had gotten to the point where I basically couldn't even walk.
Mm.
I was literally, I'm not and at that time I'm 40, I'm 40, like we're talking, I'm probably like 48,
Mhm.
47, 48. So I'm literally walking in the supermarket holding on to the shopping cart
Wow.
because the fibroids were so heavy and had grown so big. So all of that grief was just building up inside of me. It was just building
Mhm.
up and building up because I was just holding on to it all. Then, later that so I ended up in October, I ended up going to finally get an operation to try I got what they called an embolization, where they tried to stop the blood supply to see it. So, literally the day that I came home from the hospital, my husband went into the hospital. And the backstory on him is he had been dealing with an illness for 10 years.
Mm.
So, and that illness was coming to a head. And so he ends up in the hospital, and I couldn't even go check on him or anything because I'm on bed rest at home. And in between, my son is away at school. My daughter, this is her last year in high school. So so it was a lot going on. So now it's November, and then by December, he's still in the hospital. And
From October to
so
December?
well, no, from November. But it was November that I went
Okay.
into that I got out of the hospital. So it's like the end of November, right after Thanksgiving. Right after
Okay.
Thanksgiving, right before Christmas. So we're in
That's
that
still a
time
very
frame.
long time.
Yeah. So he ends up But at this particular point, I knew in my heart that it was probably coming to the end for him. And when I did finally get in, it was funny because not funny, but I remember going to the hospital when I finally was able to, got off of bed rest and I was able to get there to the hospital. And I remember me and my daughter walked into his hospital room. And for the first time in my life, I saw death. I saw literally, I looked at him and I can literally see like darkness, like literally like a shadow of darkness over him. And
Really?
my spirit instantly was like, he's dying. He's not dying. And I had to, and me and him caught each other's eyes. And he knew that I knew without even saying anything. And I remember I had played it off and I was like, I gotta, I was like, oh, I gotta do something. I gotta go downstairs and move the car or something, with the parking or something because I needed to hurry up and get out of there because I didn't want my daughter to catch on. And because she was she had came with me and I was like, I don't want her to catch on. And then I saw it. She, immediately like just jumped in the bed and, was watching TV with him. They loved watching Family Feud of all
Mhm.
things. Like these things, like I remember Family Feud was on and they both were going back and forth answering. And I remember I walked out. So, to just fast forward, he basically was in complete kidney failure. He was in complete renal failure, is what they call renal failure. Kidneys were no longer functioning. His liver had totally lost function, and on top of that, his heart was very weak. And this is all a combination of diabetes and him not following the guidelines that the doctors had given him. So that's
Got it.
another layer on it. So needless to say, he ended up, to fast forward, ended up letting him come home. And, ultimately I realized he begged them to let him come home. And they just basically was like, well, you know, you can come home, but you gotta go dialysis basically every day. Cause
Mm,
otherwise, cause, you know, and, either way and the thing about it is at that point, he was definitely terminal. If there was nothing left else that they could do for him because he was already in complete renal failure. But his thing and Christmas was always very big in our house or whatever, for us. So I know his thing was, "I just wanna get home and have Christmas this one last time with my children." And so they let him come home, and the day after Christmas, he had to go to dialysis. My son had dropped him off, and needless to say, he ended up having a heart attack and dialysis and passed away. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I'm like, I have to laugh in between it, to not break down, so that gives you a little bit of background. And two deaths, two major deaths at one time. Now, for me, I'm grieving my brother, and I'm the
yeah.
mother. I have these 2 children, 3 because I also have a stepdaughter. So that now and then on top of it, when he had the heart attack, when my husband ended up having the heart attack during dialysis, they revived him for whatever reason, which he wasn't supposed to have been, but he was. But he
Mhm.
ended up on life support at that particular point. So I had to make the decision to take him off of to take him off of life support. And, the day that we had taken him off of we're about to take him off of life support. Luckily, we were able to, his parents who lived in Florida, his mom was able to come into town.
Okay.
His friends, my family, a lot of people were able to come to the hospital and say their final goodbyes, even though he was gone. And my 2 daughters, they were the bravest of all in terms of they sat there with him throughout the
Mhm.
whole process of them disconnecting him, and they held his hand until his very last breath. Yeah. Yeah, and we're talking about at that time, we're talking about a 24-year-old and a 17-year-old, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah, like I said, yeah. So it was a lot, but I didn't have I immediately I had to forget about grieving my brother, and I really couldn't grieve my husband because I had to focus on my children. I had to make sure that they were okay. I knew that I was gonna be okay because I've dealt with, you know, losses, heavy losses before those 2, because, prior to that I had already lost a brother years ago when I was like 10 years old and he was 15 to leukemia.
Oh,
I
no.
had my dad had passed away. I had lost my dad. I had lost my grandmother. I had lost significant people in my life. So that I was able to work through prior. So I knew how to get through it. It
Mhm.
wasn't easy, but I was like, they never knew. They never had that. They never had to experience that kind of loss. And I needed to make sure that they were okay. So, but also to go back to my brother's passing, one of the things that came to mind when I finally like really kind of, because when I first got the phone call, I remember literally screaming at it was actually my husband was the one that was calling me. It was my husband and I think one of my I forgot who else was on the phone, but my friends who were there in Dubai with me, they knew ahead of time because the family had reached out to them and told them
Oh,
and made
no.
sure that they were around me when I got the phone call. Cause they was like
Gotcha.
so I remember screaming like, "Why are y'all joking?" Like, because I couldn't believe it. I was like,
It
"Why are
was
you
too
calling me with"
unbelievable.
Yeah, I remember the first thing I said is, "I can't believe y'all are calling me with this nonsense."
Like,
And
this is
then when I
the worst
realized
possible joke.
yeah, I was like, "This is not funny. Like, why would you call me with this?" And I remember because and that was part of me not like it just was so unbelievable. And then once I rationalized that this was real, the one of the first things that came to mind was my mom is not. I was like, she's not gonna survive this. I was like, my mother is.
You knew in that.
I knew in that moment
Wow.
one of the first thoughts that came to my mind was, "My mother is not gonna survive this." We're talking about an 80-something-year-old woman. She was in good health and, vibrant, but I already knew that, again, like I said, this is a woman who had already buried 1 child already. That was hard enough, and she was in her at that time, my parents like I said, I was, like, 10 years old, so my parents were probably in their late 30s, early 40s when that late 30s when that happened. So she made it through that. But at least with that particular thing, like
Mm.
my brother was ill, he had cancer. It didn't make sense, but it was one of those where you can understand. That's this is this
There was some background that let you think
yeah, you
this
know,
would possibly happen one day.
exactly, and it gave everybody a minute and, it's like,
Mhm.
and you just accepted it that this is unfortunate, but this is God's will. This is the will.
Right.
So, for that one, I knew, for that but I'm like, now I'm like, this woman now she's on even though she has 6 kids now, mind you, it still didn't matter to
Yeah.
lose and now to lose a child in this tragic way because I knew the pain that I was feeling at that time and this is my brother and not my child. And then I'm also like all of these thoughts immediately because I'm thinking I knew my mother wasn't going to make it because I know like I couldn't even imagine this with my children being a mother. As you know, when you are a mother, it's it's a yeah.
Yeah, we dress rehearse every worst case scenario every single time
And yeah,
they walk
yeah,
out the door or we hang up the phone.
yes,
And
yes,
for your mother to have been through that twice is unimaginable.
yeah.
But when you got the call, aside from your own shock and grief, your first thought was, "She's not gonna make it through this."
Nope, and it was confirmed when I remember when I finally got back to the States and, my the first thing I did was go straight, from the airport, I went straight to my mother's house, and when I saw my mother, I just you could just see she
Mhm.
was broken, and I knew she wasn't gonna live that long, so now fast forward, we're dealing in the pandemic. At that particular my mom, she again, I could see, she made it like the pandemic now it's 3 years later. But during those 3 years after my brother had passed away, you can see that her spirit wasn't
Mm,
you can just feel the heaviness in her. But
yeah.
she still kept along with life. She was in wonderful health because now 3 years later, she's 84 years old and she's not on any medication. She's still driving a car, even though she wasn't supposed to, but that's a whole nother story. But she's driving, she's civic minded, she belonged to a civic association in the community. Like she still was on the go. She was a vibrant still vibrant. But I knew as her daughter, I knew the difference. I knew my mother's spirit wasn't the same. So now we have the pandemic that comes along, and she lived in her own house that she had been living in since my parents had gotten married or whatever. My sister and my sister's daughter were living with her. And the way
Mhm.
the house was designed in New York is big on what they call split levels. So we were able to isolate her and keep her up on the main level of the house, and so that my sister and my niece, they were in and out a lot. So they separated her so they didn't
Mm.
make sure that she didn't get contaminated. But I'm looking at my mother, I'm talking to her, pretty much every other day or every day, and I'm FaceTiming her. And I can see on FaceTime that she's not looking well. But, my first reaction was, you know, it's the pandemic. None of us were getting our hair done. Nobody was getting dressed. We were all in pajamas. We all look crazy. So
Yeah.
I was like, I just left it at that. But then April had came, and that's her birthday. And so I was like, I've never missed my mother's birthday, and I'm not going to miss it, because now you're dealing with the pandemic, where you're hearing on the news, and not even just on the news, but even in real life, people that you are knowing are dying every single day. Like,
Yep.
during that period, I know, like, a lot of us have forgotten it, but it was a scary, I think that was probably one of the scariest times in our entire lives.
Yeah.
Outside of war, who could think of anything more devastating than that? And
Yeah.
it was one of those things where there were people in the communities that were dying. It didn't matter what age, it was all ages. And so part of it was, there was no certainty anymore. And
Right.
it was a realization that death, what is death? Is the equalizer. Death is an equalizer. It's something everybody is going to go through, and nobody is immune from it.
Right.
So I made the decision. I was not going to see my mother for her birthday. This was not going to be a year that I was not. And not because I was afraid that she was going to pass away, but because at that time we started all realizing how precious life was. And so I remember I arranged a parade. I contacted all of my siblings,
Yeah.
and like, all my nieces and nephews, also all of her grandchildren, all but one were there. All of her children that were alive were there. We came outside. I had everybody make signs. So I was like, everybody make a sign. And it was such a beautiful moment, so, and then my sister got her to come outside, and she was so shocked, and we're like parading around the front yard, and we're singing, singing happy birthday to her, the Stevie Wonder version. And then
Of course.
so elated, and she was just so, and I'm like, and I can picture the pictures that were taken that day in my head, and you just see all of us all across her front lawn. You just see all of these people, and it's all her family, and holding up signs, and then it turned into a contest who had the best sign. Because some people got really crafty, so
Right.
just turned into a real, and she was just so elated. But I remember, again, I was able to lay eyes on her, and I'm saying to myself, she's not well. But I didn't want to mention anything, because I didn't want to destroy that moment, because I saw how happy she was. And it was a moment for all of us, because it was the first time we all saw each other,
Mm.
because we had all gotten locked down from February.
Yeah.
So
It had been
now,
months. Yeah.
yeah. So this was the first time that we all physically saw each other. So it was just such an elated moment. So I left it alone. But then Mother's Day came out within about 2 or 3 weeks later, there's Mother's Day. So again, same thing. I've never not seen my mother for Mother's Day. This was not going to be the first time. So I remember I was like, I'm going to see my mother. And, I didn't bring the kids with me or anything. It was just me.
Mhm.
And as soon as I walked in the door, and she came down the hallway, and we just looked each other in the eye, and the first thing I said was, "Who's gonna make the appointment, me or you?" And she
Okay.
said, "Go ahead and make the appointment."
Did she disclose anything that she'd been
She
feeling or
nothing. She didn't just go,
changes?
I knew. I just looked at her, and I was like, "Mm-mm, you're not well. You're
Is
not
she
well."
was she ever a stubborn person about her health or going to get checked out?
No. No. And then, like I said, my mother was 84 years old, not not a single medication.
Mm.
No medication, no illnesses, no nothing. She suffered, only issue she had was high blood pressure, which she managed on her own. She was able to manage it with her diet.
Mhm.
She would every once in a while it would spike up, but when it would spike, she would immediately go to her doctor and they would either see if they could adjust it with medication or just adjust her diet. But that was it. And most of the time, it was just even if she did have to take the medication, it was only like a temporary thing. It was only like, okay, just take it so we can bring it down, but watch your diet. And my mother was very strict about her diet and she was originally from the South, from Alabama, and she grew up on a farm. Like her grandparents had a farm. So she grew up with whole foods and eating good food and eating right. And she still maintained that, even in New York, she maintained a very, very healthy eating lifestyle. So she really, not a single illness at all. But that's why I knew because my mother had never been sick. My mother had never been,
Mm.
the only thing she had been in the hospital for was for either having babies and her knee replacement surgery. And that was it. That was
Yeah.
it. Those were the only times she ever was hospitalized. And so looking at her, like I said, it just immediately, I'm like, yeah. Of course, by the time I got her to the doctor, I never saw somebody turn white, and I mean the doctor. He literally turned white, and he was a white man. He literally he was so shaken because he was like, "Your mother is so severely dehydrated and malnutrition right now." He was like, "That I need." He's like, "I want her in the hospital now." Like he was about to have his nurse call the ambulance, and I had to convince I'm sitting there, I'm like, "Wait," I knew she was sick, but I'm like, "Wait." I'm like, "Give me a second, give us a minute." And we were able to convince him. I said, "Please, can we at least get her home for 1 minute so that I
Mhm.
can call my siblings and we can, work this out." Also, because it's the pandemic, we know at that particular time, if you went into the hospital, nobody can come with you. The hospitals were so overwhelmed you didn't
Right.
know if you were gonna get a bed. The last
Right.
thing I wanted was my mother to be sitting in some hallway and
Yes.
not being tended to. So I was like, "You gotta give us a minute to work this out." And the good thing about it, oldest brother, was a high-ranking detective. He had a lot of pull with the hospitals, the local hospitals. So that gave him a minute to, make sure that, every weekend at least have that little bit of an edge as well, and to make sure that she was not gonna just be sitting in a hallway, that she was going straight into a hospital room. We got her home and then and this is the craziness of life, of my life. As I'm at her house, and I'm waiting for my brother to come, I'm waiting for my oldest brother who lived still in the same neighborhood that we grew up in. I'm waiting for him to come over to the house. I get a phone call from my dog groomer because earlier that morning, I had my daughter drop off our dog at the groomer. My dog groomer calls me, and this is my dog, 16 years now. And I'm like, I don't know if you have a dog owner, but
I
everybody,
do.
they are a part of the family. Like our whole entire family loved this dog, you know. And she calls me and she's like, "He's not well, June. You got to come and get him." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" So I'm like, I'm on the phone with my daughter as I'm sitting and waiting for my brother to come so I can tell him.
This is the last thing that you
I
need
just
to be
I'm
worrying
like,
about.
what's going on? And I'm like, Madison, you gotta go get Prada. That's my dog's name. Don't judge me.
That is adorable.
I was like, Madison, go get Prada immediately. Then I'm calling the vet and I'm like, my daughter is coming with the dog. And then I had to call another family friend because I was like, please, because my daughter, when she got him, she was hysterical because he was crying. And I can hear him in the background as I'm talking to her crying. He didn't even sound like a dog. He sounded like a child crying. He was in so much pain. And I'm like, oh my God. So she's hysterical. And I'm calling up a family friend and I'm like, look, I need you to meet Madison at the vet. She's not, so, and of course, the same thing when she got him to the vet, you couldn't go inside. They told you had to stay in the parking lot and they had to come out and get him and bring him in. And then
Yeah.
I'm on the phone with them and having this conversation and, I'm in the middle of getting ready to have this conversation with my brother and my siblings about my mom. I'm on the phone with the vet and they're telling me, they're like, look, he appears to be in kidney failure. And we don't know if he's going to make it or not. We can kind of stabilize him, keep him overnight, but we don't know if he's going to make it. And again, I had to make a quick decision. The first thing that came to my mind, I am not going to let this dog die alone without his family. I've had this dog for 16 years. I'm
Yeah.
not going to let him die alone in a vet. Like, I don't know if and again, so I was like, I had to make the decision to say, look, just do whatever you need to do to make him comfortable. Give him whatever pain medication you can, but bring him back outside to my daughter. And I had to call her and I was like, Madison, they're going to bring Prada out, bring him home. I will be home as soon as possible. So after, I had to have the conversation, and now we're having this conversation with my sibling, about my mother and making the arrangements to get her into the hospital that the next day. But by the time, so I got that straightened out, I rush home. I get home to my house, and I I just see that I knew my dog wasn't. I knew he was dying. So all I could do was and then the thing about dogs and animals, I don't know if you ever know, when they know that they're dying, they have a sixth sense. They try to separate themselves from their family. They don't like to be around you. And in hindsight, I remember like the weeks prior, leading up to that, every time we would let him out, because he was a little dog, so a lot of times we just let him out in the backyard. He kept going behind the shed and hiding. And we was like, why is he going behind the shed? And I was thinking, I was like, maybe there's something back there. So
Hmm.
eventually, like one day, I was like, let me see what's back there, because maybe there's something back there that he's trying to tell us. And it was nothing back there. And I remember one day my daughter physically had to go behind the shed. And, like, we're talking about a little thin alley where the shed abuts up to the fence. So she had to, shimmy back there and, basically physically get him out of there because he wouldn't
Mm.
come out. So he knew he was dying. So that night when I had gotten back to the house, I tried to keep him in his dog bed in my room next to my bed, and he kept trying to get out. So eventually I had to close the door, and he still and then I remember just picking him up, and I never slept with my dog in my bed. My children did. They loved it, but I never. But I was like, you know
Yeah.
what? I remember I just wrapped him up in a blanket and I put him on the bed. And I just slept with him all night. And like all night, he was just, whining and just fidgety. And when I got up that morning, I can see that his breath was labored. And then my daughter ended up coming into the room with me because and then we took him outside. I prayed over him. I remember I saged him. I spoke to him. I told him how much we loved him and appreciated him. We stayed outside for a little while with him, and then we eventually ended up going back inside and we laid down in the bed. And then probably 10 minutes later, he just went, and
Mm.
that was it. And so this is my life in terms so I'm just like now, so long, so I had to now I'm making arrangements to have him cremated and da da da. And then I'm also on the phone with my brother and I'm like, because he was the one that took over in terms of getting my mom to the hospital
Right.
and stuff. Again, no time to grieve losing this dog because now I gotta figure out taking care of my mother. We ultimately, it's a very long story, but ultimately we were able to bring her home. We got her home because that was the most important thing. Because it was quickly determined that she was in stage 4 cancer and that she was terminal. She was terminal. And my mother knew it.
She knew it.
That was the thing. So this goes back to where I'm saying I knew my mother was not going to make it, and she ended up having uterine uterine cancer, the whole cervix. And I look at it like this: she was grieving that child in her soul and in her womb,
Yep.
and that's where that cancer. That's why she got of all cancers in the world to get, she got that cancer because that her body literally was grieving that child. And it was just so I knew it. So it just became a matter of I couldn't even sit and pray to God and say, please save my mother and make her get better. I knew it was everything around me said it was time, and I knew she was done. I knew she was done. I knew she was in so much pain internally that she was done. And I had to change my perspective real quick. And this is the thing about me. And I know it's not easy for a lot of people, but this is me. Am I have to I've because of all of the things that I have been through, I had to learn how to pivot very quick and change my perspective. My first thought, after don't get me wrong, I cried, I broke down, I wept, but I gave myself that minute, and then ultimately I was just like, I was like, God, I know it's her time. I know she's not. So I'm not gonna sit here and scream and cry and beg you to make her better because one, I know that's not gonna happen. Two, I know she was ready. I
She
know
was
she
ready.
was ready. So it just became okay. All I could say is, God, just please don't let her suffer too
Yeah.
long with this.
Right.
That was it. I was just like, "Don't let her suffer." It you know, I remember years ago, I saw this movie about this woman who was terminally ill and she knew it, and she called in her whole family from all over the country. I don't remember the name of the movie, I don't even remember the people in this movie, but I remember her calling in the whole family, and they didn't understand why this woman she was the matriarch of the family, and and she had several children, and she called in everybody, and she made sure she was like, "All of y'all must come, the grandchildren, the children, everybody came." And they didn't know what they were coming, but they quickly realized it when they got there.
Mm.
And it was such, and I think it took over a span of a week or so or something like that. But she basically was slowly saying goodbye to everyone and preparing them for her death.
On her terms.
And at the end, she's sitting in her bedroom and all of her children and everybody is around. And so now I'm looking at my mother, and that's where I was like, one of the things that the beauty of family and what happened, and I had to start looking, it was very heavy dealing with it because we're talking from June to August. So it's June when we literally at the beginning of June when we found out that she was terminally ill and stuff, and she ultimately ended up passing away at the beginning of on August 15th. But during that time, the family rallied together. And it was such a beautiful thing because it was effortlessly. Everybody took a shift, everybody figured it out. There was no, oh, I don't have time. We worked it out. We got the right care in place. Everything worked out. And it was just everybody rallied. Everybody stepped up to the plate
That's beautiful.
and made sure that she was taken care of. And I remember, she had gotten to the point at one point where she, she was too sick to even take care of her personal needs. And I remember me and my sister, because we're her daughters, my brothers were like, Junior, and I was, no, but, like it was it I looked at it and I was like, this is, I said, this is one of those acts of love that I can show her how much I loved her. It didn't bother me at all. Like
Yeah.
it to me, it was like me returning what she did for me as a child. And
Yeah.
now I'm able to, she gave me the opportunity. I had the opportunity to give her back that kind of love and showing her and caring for her and taking care of her. I know like some people like, "Oh, I would." No,
Yeah.
it just, it didn't bother me one bit. And if anything, I felt honored to be able to be in a position that I can actually give back to my mother and even in this in this small way. And I know, and it gave her her dignity,
Yes.
and I know
Yes.
and I know for her, it felt good that she had her daughters there, being able, but, in that moment. And I remember that when it got down to us realizing like, it was a matter of days. And the home health care worker who we had in place, because we had her and for the first 4 weeks or so, she basically didn't have to do anything. We just had her there in place because one, it was part, my mother had that insurance that she was able to have this woman come in. And two,
Okay.
just in case it helped out whoever was on call that particular day. If they were running late or if they had to leave, at least we knew that the goal was to make sure somebody was with her around the clock. But in the end, the home healthcare workers had to step in a lot because now she's completely bedridden, and now we have to bathe her in the bed, and we have to
Hmm.
take care of her, but medically wise as well. And so she was able to assist and help us in that process. But the funny thing is, it was funny because I remember her telling one of my brothers, um, 'cause my shift was late and I later than hers, so a lot of
Hmm.
time it gotten to the point where I wouldn't see her. She would already be gone by the time that I came. But I remember her telling my brother, "Where's the other sister?" Meaning me, because my older sister lived there.
Mm.
But she was like, "Where's the other sister?" And she said, "Because your mother," she was like, she was basically trying to tell him what he already knew. She's coming to the end, and she was like, "Your sister, the one that lives here, is not gonna be able to handle it." She knew right
Mm.
away that she was like, "Where's your other sister?" Because she knew that I was, a little bit, I was stronger because my sister was still in a state of denial about it. She hadn't gotten to that place of accepting.
Do you think that your sister, because she lived there in the house, or like you said, it was split
Mhm.
level, but was there any guilt that maybe she didn't see or recognize the change in your mother? Is that maybe what was happening with her?
It might have been a little bit of it, but I think the main thing is it's just a different of personalities.
Mm.
Um, I think it's just more or less it's just a difference of personalities. We tease my sister all the time in terms of we're like, oh, she lives in her world. She goes into her bubble real quick. We call it,
Mhm.
I'm not gonna say her name, but we call it her name world. And it's just, and nothing against her. But it just goes to show, it's just one of those things. It just goes to show you, like everybody processes things differently and processes death differently. And again, I hate to say, oh well, I'm the stronger one or whatever. I just have a different perspective, and I'm able to deal with reality in a different. I'm gonna face reality head on. I'm not, for my sister in terms of, and for a lot of people, for her mental peace, she has to go into this world in order
Yeah.
to maintain her peace. I don't think my life and all of that I have been through, I didn't even have the luxury of being that way.
Right.
And it just was not my personality. But it was just funny that this woman, like she picked up on that right away. It was just funny how she picked up on that right away. But during this moment, during this whole season, these brief 2 months or whatever, we got to say goodbye to my mom slowly.
That is
So
beautiful.
when I look at it, it was like it's like the long kiss goodbye. It was a
Mm.
long kiss goodbye. And it wasn't even, the conversations were never like about, oh, what do you want to tell me or that because but it was more or less got a moment to just let her know. It was just more about letting her know how much I loved her. And that was for everybody. It gave everybody a moment to be able to let her know and to show her. Because we can tell people we love them and love them and love them, but the act of love is it's the main thing. So it gave us all the opportunity to actually act out how much we loved her. And like I said, by nurturing her, taking care of her this is her most vulnerable time in her life
Mhm.
since she's been a child. So we were able to give that back to her and take care of her. And this is a woman who had taken care of all of us.
All of you.
And not just her children, her extended family, her grandchildren, and she was also an educator for 30 something years. So she had tons of students, so this is a woman who gave so much of herself and was a strong woman. So this is her most vulnerable time. And it was just such a beautiful moment to be able to give back to her. And it was just, and especially because, like as I mentioned with the other deaths, I was, people were ripped from me so fast in the
Mhm.
past that I never had that kind of moment. So even though I'm losing now, this is my last parent and this is my mom who's like to the world, to all of us. And she's the matriarch of the entire family. And she was one of the last of her generation. at the
Yeah.
also, that's the other thing. All of our other family in her generation, my parents, my grandparents, aunts, uncles, everybody else had already predeceased her. So she's basically the last one on her side of the family.
And that's something that I don't think is really understood enough, and I'm so glad that you're bringing this up because when our parents, our grandparents, our elders get to that senior age, we
Mhm.
forget that their social circle, their
It's
community,
gone.
the people they
It's
talk to every day, they are gone. So when we're too busy to make that phone call or too busy to stop by and
yeah,
check on mom, check on grandma, big mama, whoever, we need to
yeah,
stop and understand that that might be the only connection they've had with another human being that day, that week, who knows?
yeah,
And I'm thinking about, my husband's grandmother is very advanced in her age and in she's losing her memory, all the things that are happening as
yeah,
she gets
yeah,
older,
mhm,
and all of her siblings have passed on, her best
yeah,
friends, the ladies that she would gossip with at church,
yeah,
all of the things, the relationships that brought her joy and kept her world full is now gone. So her
yeah,
entire world is there in her house from the living room to the bedroom to the kitchen, and that's it.
mm, yeah,
And for us to stop for a moment, like you say, living out loud and being so fast to go to the next thing, what a blessing it was that in spite of the chaos that was happening in your personal life, that you were
mhm,
able to come together, you personally, but then your entire family to come
yeah,
together and just surround her with love in that
yeah,
time is incredible. It's rare and it's
yeah,
incredible. And I mean, my heart goes out to you for the loss that you had to experience in such a short time span, but I'm also thinking that most people don't get that chance to say goodbye.
no, and we did and this is the first time we've ever had that chance, and like I said,
Mhm.
and we're talking about a family that we've lost a sibling, we've lost parent grandparent, we've lost, friends, all kinds of, lost my father, before that, my father had passed away in 2003, a year after I got married. It was like one minute he's walking me down the aisle, and in context, me and my husband were one of those. We had the children, bought a house, and they got married. So we have been together. We were way we did everything backwards. So
You had all the parts of the salad, but you put them in different orders.
yeah, we just put it in different order. Our children were literally in our wedding. And I'm just like, and I'm like, my God, and again, it was one of those,
Mhm.
we're celebrating one of the happiest days. And my father, this is the first time he gets to walk, one of his daughters down the aisle. And for the first time, I literally saw my father shed a little tear because he's
That's
from that
beautiful.
generation.
That's
And,
beautiful.
yeah, and, and then within, like, not even a year later, I get the same thing. I get a phone call, and it's literally the same day I had just had a graduation party at my house. My sister-in-law had just gotten her, I think it was her doctorate, and they had, they ended up having the graduation party at our house since her parents had moved away, had just moved down south in Florida. I'm cleaning up and, getting in the bed, and then all of a sudden I get a phone call, your dad passed away. So we had never ever had that moment or that chance to do that. And then on top of it, the other thing to go to say when you're looking at your parents at this point, most of us, again, like I said, most of our parents, and if you're fortunate to have your grandparents left, they didn't see all of their family go. So now you're looking at my mother who lost everybody.
Yeah,
Her parents, her siblings, children. She's seen everybody who she has grown up with and known has gone. The only people left are her children and her grandchildren. That's it.
that's it.
So also you got to so in her mindset, and then again, she was a very accomplished woman, and that was the other thing. She even despite having, like she was the first one to graduate, go to college in her, she was the first one. We're talking about my mother was born in 1936, so this is the early 30s. The majority of her contemporaries were getting married straight out of high school.
Yeah.
And that meaning her cousins, her sister, all of them, they got married. They didn't even finish high school before they got married. So my mother, on that, she was a pioneer, the first one to go to college.
Go, mom.
She
Go, mama.
she went to college. She was a Sigma Gamma Rho. She started the chapter at her college. Um,
Okay.
Graduated with honors. She even when she did get married at 24, she was considered old. And when they got married, my parents had like 6 kids, and it's like the first 5 are all 11 months apart or a year apart. So she had like within 5 years, she had 5 kids.
My
And then
goodness.
there's a little break between me and my sister. I'm clearly an oops baby.
She was tired by then.
She didn't even I used to joke with her all the time. I was like, "You were just in denial." Like, she
Right.
'cause it's the whole thing of, she didn't know her due date. How my name came about is, she was due her and the doctor thought it was April, but, and then I didn't come into June, and so my father was like, "Oh, she's gonna be named June." But,
Gotcha.
yeah, but she, after teaching, and she fought to maintain her career, even in the midst of having all of these children. It was hard for her to work. So she was basically a stay-at-home mom, but she found any moment that she could find to work. She substitute teach for years until we got of age where she can teach full time. And then she went back to school and got her master's when she was in her 40s. Just was a phenomenal teacher, an exemplary, teacher, got plenty of accolades and awards for her being a teacher. Then then when she retired, she traveled all over the world, literally traveled all over the world. She joined a travel club. She joined a civic association. She was civic minded. She did everything. She led this whole life. And in between, she was a phenomenal mother, a phenomenal, grandmother, a wonderful friend, and
Mhm.
everything to all her relationships. She was just this phenomenal woman. She wrote papers. She did everything. So she had led. So now this is why I say I know she was done because
Yeah.
her job was done. She had did everything. And this was the last, losing my brother. She just was like, I'm done. I'm done.
Yeah.
She didn't want to see anymore. She had saw it all. And
Yeah.
I couldn't ask God to keep her around for us because
Yeah.
that would have been selfish. So
She
we
was
had to
ready.
let her go. We had to
Yeah.
let her go. And I remember the day, so she passed away on a Saturday, but that Friday, we knew. And I remember the whole entire family came over. And again, we're in the middle of COVID, but we all said, COVID be damned. None of us cared. Nobody was wearing a mask.
Right.
It
By
was like, we
then,
don't care.
yeah, we
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 don't
we were
care.
all done. Yeah.
We were done. I was like, at this point, and we didn't even have the vaccines at this time. But I was like, I don't even care. I am not going. We all came together, and I remember my best friend who was a pastor. She came over. I called her up, and she came, and she basically gave her last rites. And I remember, like again, it was just there was a moment where I remember getting in the bed with her, and she wasn't conscious at all at this particular point, but I remember just laying in the bed with her and just talking to her. And what my mother was saying though, she was praying. Even though she wasn't conscious, she was praying.
Mm.
And I remember her praying, and I'm like, "Wait, is she praying?" Like, she literally was praying, but she was not conscious, but she was
Wow.
praying, and I was just like, and I just remember telling her, "It's okay." And I didn't want to stay and see her take her last breath because, again, like, to go back, like I said, I had to take my husband off the life support. I saw him take his last breath. I held my dog in his hands. I saw him take his last breath. I was like, "I don't wanna see her take her last breath." I was like, I'm and my daughter, she was still in school, and I remember I had to get her back to LSU. So I got on the plane. I took my daughter back, and by the time the plane landed, I got a phone call. They was like, "Mom passed away," and I was like, I knew. One of
Mhm.
the other things is I remember coming home because I had kind of like the night shift, and I remember well when I would leave, not the night shift, but I remember when I left my mom's house one night. I came home and I always had to decompress, and at that time that was during the time D Nice was doing.
The
his
verses.
quarantine. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, D Nice. It was D
That what
Nice with his
that's right,
quarantine.
because yes.
It was birth yeah, he was doing his DJ set. I forgot
Yes.
what it was called, quarantine. Yeah.
Yes.
And I remember sitting outside and and I would listen to his music and I would decompress and part of also what my biggest problem, what I do now also is I get on get on the computer and I'm looking and and I'm shopping and I'm looking and like on Instagram and this stuff comes up, it's shopping. And I clicked on to this one site and this beautiful white dress came up and I was like, that's the dress my mom's gonna be buried in.
Mm,
And I remember I ordered the dress. So that Friday, that week that we knew that that was her last week, I remember bringing it to the house. And that Friday, I bought it. No, that Friday I bought it over, and I was like telling my sister, I was like, I
you
know,
said
this is I was like, "This is her dress. This is gonna be her dress." And it was funny because later on, me and my sister, when we were talking about afterwards or whatever, she was like, I was so mad when you" and I was like, "Yeah," but I was like, "But you know what, Tracy? I didn't have time to I allowed you to live in your denial about it. I didn't have time to do that. I
no.
and I was the executor. Me and my brother were the executors. I am that type of I am a take charge the business person in the family. Like I'm taking care of business. Things I know what needs to be done and we got to take care of business. I don't have time to sit here and cry and be in denial about it. But I'm going
Yeah.
to allow you. And I gave her that grace, and I had no problem with that. But I was like, yeah, I know. And
Yeah.
then one of but again, to go back to that night, that Friday night, I remember laying in the bed and on top of hearing my mother pray, and on top of laying with her and pray, and then starting to kind of like pray with her. I took in the moment and I was like, I can hear like my nieces and nephews were down the hall and they're like, like talking and laughing and stuff. And I know she heard that. And I know she like again, how beautiful
Mhm.
is it that you get the chance to have everybody there around you, loving on you in your last moment.
Yeah.
And and I don't even think they really grasped it, but I was like, I know that did her soul, 'cause it let her know that not only did you do a well job, but look how well you did because you have and again, the way a lot of families are so fractured and on top of people moving here and there. And again, we're in the middle of the pandemic, but she was able to have that beauty of having all of those, the most important people in her life,
Mhm.
everything that all of the children that she bore that was still alive in the life. And even with our grandchildren, they are a part of her, were right there saying goodbye to her in that last moment. And it
She was
also
able.
made me think about that movie
Mhm.
that I was talking about in terms
Yeah.
of how that woman, how important that was.
She was
You
able to
know, and
see her legacy right there in front of her in her last days. I do wanna ask you because I the the person that is listening to this right now, and they're just like, "Gosh,
mhm.
this woman has experienced just tremendous loss." And she did not have or wasn't allowed space to do her own grieving necessarily the way
I
that
have
might
now. At
you have
that
now.
moment, I haven't, yeah, but I've worked. I definitely have worked through it. Yeah,
So
now, but I did.
this is the part that I want you to share because there's is like a beautiful full circle element to all of this,
Mhm.
and it's actually what I thought was so incredible about your story. So share with everybody what you have experienced since your loved ones have passed on, because it's been you've had some beautiful signals, some beautiful reaching out
Yes.
that might surprise somebody.
I know. So it'll start. So I'll start with how like my grandmother's passing. So my grandmother for me, I know I'm taking you back to 2000 and I remember these dates specifically because again, I had just had my daughter
Mhm.
And my grandmother had just came to take care of me. And after I got home from the hospital, she's the first person at my house, rolling up her sleeves, taking care of me, the baby, my husband, the household, my son, everything. So and then that was in March. And then by the beginning of June, she took suddenly ill. And within 2 weeks, I lost her. And my grandmother, my nana, was like a mother to me. This is my dad's mother, and she only had boys. She had 4 boys. She never had a
Mm.
girl.
Okay.
And me and her from the beginning, I don't know what it was. I don't know. We used to say it was because we were both Geminis, but we were very close, very close. And my whole entire life, I had like this closeness to my nana. And it was, and I'm not saying that she didn't have it with any of her other grandchildren, but for me, I'm speaking just on me. And
Mhm.
she was just a phenomenal grandmother, the perfect grandmother in the world. And I know a lot of people may say they have one, and I'm sure there's a lot of them out there, but I had that the perfect grandmother. So for me, and not only was she my grandmother, she was everything to me. She was my confidant. She was everything. And she was like a bonus mother. Mothers and daughters growing up sometimes, it's
Yep, we
because
understand.
your mother's raising you. Your mother is raising you. She's trying to raise a woman. Your grandmother in the house the same way I am with my grandson. I just get to spoil him. I don't have to
Yeah.
raise him. I don't, so his parents. So that was the thing. And I could come to her and talk to her or anything. But long story short, she was my world. So this is the first person, like I was utterly devastated. This utterly, utterly, utterly devastated. And on top of that, what I realize now also, I was dealing with postpartum depression, that was real. So I'm dealing with postpartum depression on top of I'm losing my grandmother. But long story short, I remember I ended up going back to work, and I remember one of my coworkers, I don't know how we got on the subject, but we did, and we were talking about death. And I was just telling her how I was struggling. And she was like, you know what? I had the same issue when I lost my dad. And she said, I went to a medium. And I'm like looking at her, a medium. And this is before the Long Island medium, where I'm
Mhm.
from, that everybody may have heard of. And the other, I think it's another John Gray, I think his name is. I can't think of
Yeah.
offhand. But
Yes,
this is
yes.
before anybody understood or even heard about mediums. And I was like, so what are you, a medium? And she was like, yes, I went to a medium. I made an appointment. I went to see this woman. And I remember, I was very skeptical, about this, because I had never done anything. The only thing I ever knew of was Ghost. Then you
Mhm,
think of Whoopi Goldberg and Ghost. And I was like, okay,
right.
let me see how this is gonna go. And I didn't tell her anything. I didn't say anything to this woman. We sat down. The first thing she did, she prayed. She prayed with me, and she prayed over the reading. She asked God to come through to bless the reading and so forth. So that gave me a good feeling. And then the first thing she said to me, she was like, "Your grandmother said keep the necklace." And I instantly started crying. And I'm because my grandmother had made me the executor again. Here me go again. Me and my brother are the executors of her
Yeah.
estate. My oldest brother and me, the two book we called each other the bookends. And on top of it, she left me. My father and his one of his brothers was still alive, so they got the bulk of her estate. But what she did, she left me all of her personal items. Everything personal of all her personal, all of the contents of her house, everything she left me. Now, she didn't leave it for me to keep everything, but she knew that I would know and distribute it or do what needed to be done. And
Right.
that's what I did. And I remember one time I had called everybody, like I took certain things that meant a lot to me. I was like, I'm taking, I don't care, and I did. And I remembered I had found this necklace, and again, the significance of this necklace is my father had bought her the chain, and my grandfather had bought her the emblem, the charm, and the
Mhm.
charm was a Gemini charm. Now, remind you, I told you me and my grandmother were both Gemini.
Yes,
But
yes.
the crazy thing is, my grandmother was allergic to 14 karat gold, so she never could wear it. 14 karat gold actually broke her out. So she never wore this chain. And when I found it, I didn't even find it in her. I wasn't even looking for it. I had totally forgotten about it because again, my dad had bought this chain for her, this was years ago. So I had totally forgotten about it. And I remember, like when she had first passed away, my father was like, make sure you get her jewelry box. And I was like, okay, I took her jewelry box. And my grandmother wasn't one to have, like, she didn't, again, she was allergic to jewelry. So she didn't have like a lot of expensive piece of jewelry or anything like that. But he was just like, just take her jewelry box. And it wasn't in there. It just so happened it was this one day I just happened to be in the dining room and it was in the break front. And I was just like, what is it doing in there? But, I didn't pay it any attention. I was like, oh, and I was like, oh my God, I forgot all about this necklace. And I remember bringing it home. In the interim, I had told my cousins and, other family members. I remember I had told them at one point, I was like, look, go to the house and y'all can take whatever you want. Whatever you want, y'all take it. And they did. And I remember one of my aunts called me up and she was like asking me about this necklace. And I was like, okay. She wanted it for one of her daughters, one of my
Uh-huh.
cousins.
Okay.
And I was just like, okay, I'll look. I didn't let her know that I had it. I was like, okay, I'll look for it and I'll let you know because right away I was like, I already knew. I knew my grandmother and I knew one thing I knew about her. She had already told me, again, we were so close. I knew who she wanted to have what. And I knew I was like, okay, but I remember after I hung up with my aunt and I'm sitting there in my den and I was like, I don't know. Do I give it to her? Do I not? I'm like, I'm saying this all in my head.
Hmm.
So when that woman said, your grandmother said, keep the necklace,
Keep the necklace.
it made me realize my grandmother was witnessing that whole entire, so my grandmother was still with me. And that reading, I still have it on tape. It was the most phenomenal reading ever. It was the most phenomenal experience. And all of my loved ones came through that had passed over. And even I remember I told you I lost a brother that when I
Hmm.
was 10 and he was 15. He came through and took her immediately to my mother's house. She described my mother's house to the T. And he literally went to my mother's house in real time and walked up the steps, everything. And then my niece had drawn a picture of a butterfly. It was an abstract butterfly. It wasn't like it was an
Hmm.
abstract because she's a very, she's very artistic little girl at that time, she when she was a little girl, she still is, but she was very artistic and drew this after and my sister had it on the refrigerator and the woman drew it. And when she drew it, okay. I was like, there's no way you can tell me that this is not. She literally, and again, I have a picture of that drawing. And he described my sister in the kitchen. My sister at that time was washing the dishes. But she said, when you get home, she said, get call and ask your sister if she was what she was doing at this particular time. He also talked about how and it was funny because my mother had these paintings on the wall, and it was always one that was it would always be crooked. And we was like,
Hmm.
why is this picture always crooked? He said, I'm the one he's like, I'm always there. And my brother was a practical joker. He said, I'm the one that keeps moving the painting.
Wow.
And then the other phenomenal part of this reading is my father's father, my grandfather. I have a picture of my grandfather, it was in my living room and I still have it here too. And he's in his military uniform. And she started describing him. She's like, he's a grandfather, he's tall, and da da da. And then, but again, I'm trying to be vague because I'm trying to make sure that I'm not feeding so people don't think I'm
Yeah.
feeding. This is real.
Right.
And then finally she was like, it was the man that was behind you when you walked in the door. And
He was there in the
he
room.
said, the same man that was behind you when you walked in the door. And I just instantly through now, I am a ball of tears through all of this at this point because I immediately went into tears the moment that she said your grandmother, and I never got out of that state. And when she said that, I almost passed out. I did just what you said. I was like, wait, what? She
Yeah.
said it was the man that was behind you when you walked in the She said he's shaking keys. And she's like, I'm seeing keys. He's shaking keys in a red pouch. I pulled out I have my grandmother's purse and I have the keys to her house in that purse and I keep it in my pocketbook. Every time I change pocketbooks, I put it in that pocketbook. And she's like, he's jingle. And so when she was like, he's jingling keys, he was letting me know. And he described at that time, I remember I worked in this building and it was underground parking. And she said, he's showing me you getting out of a car. She's like, it's like a parking garage. So basically, he was saying, well, not ba he literally was saying, "I'm with you all the
All the
time,
time.
watching over you and protecting you all the time." And again, I'm bawling because the thing about my grandfather was very protective of the women in the family,
Mm.
and I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house, growing up. And my grandfather, that was one thing, don't mess with his girls. He was very, very protective over the women in the family. And I was like, I said, he's still, after all of this time, because he had passed away when I was in college. So I was like, after all of this time, he's letting me know I'm still with you. So
Yeah.
that reading is where I developed my perspective also about death and so forth, because it lets you know that love is eternal. It never dies, and the spirit is eternal. As long as your loved ones are here on this earth and they remember you, you still are alive. You never truly, death is not, there's no true death. The true death is when you have left no impact on this world and there's no one left that remembers you or loves you or loved you. So as long as I feel, as long as I'm alive, they are alive. And they will
Mhm.
continue to be alive through my children, because through the stories and through whatever memories that the ones that did have the opportunity to know them, and then they will be able to pass those down to their children. And one of the things is my mom was very big on, especially because she had moved from Alabama to New York, so she was away from, she
Mm.
raised, we were raised away from all of her family. We didn't get to grow up
Right.
with her family. So she was adamant about telling us about all of her family members and all of these beautiful, wonderful stories of, growing up, even though it was Alabama and we're talking Jim Crow, but she still had such a rich childhood and a rich family, and she let us know. So I'm like, so it just reminded me that, they don't pass away. And that is why,
Yeah.
Macy and a lot of people, especially a lot of Christians were like, oh, that's the devil and that's, witchery and witchcraft. And I don't believe in any of that. That is why it's important. And that's why I said I go back when I told you that one of the things that I did is I started digging into how our ancestors worship, how they worship in Africa, how the Indians worship, and the basis of their religious practice was the reverence to the ancestors. And
Yes.
then it's like it's the whole thing which was played out, and it was played out beautifully in Black Panther.
Yes.
That
Yes.
that's based on real life. That is how you have to understand that they don't die. They don't die. They just cross, and that's why I like to say they passed over or they crossed over, but they're still here. They're still here. And I remember even with my husband when he had passed away, my daughter is very in tune. She's always been a very clairvoyant type of child and seeing things, but she when she was younger, she couldn't handle it. So I had to tell the spirits, lay off of her basically. I'm like,
Mm.
but I remember her the day, so the day we had taken my husband off of life support and we get back to the house and she goes in her room and, my best friend was with me and she comes out of her room and she has a card in her hand. No, nothing written in it. It said, to my daughter for her birthday, I love you. From dad. It was a birthday card, but it wasn't even written on. And she was like, I was just like, wow. He was letting her know because of all things that would end up in the middle of her floor. Now,
Yeah.
girls have different bedrooms.
Yes.
you know, the
Yes.
teenage girl's bedroom is something to behold. But it was right. She was like, mommy. I was like, at first I thought she was joking. She's like, I kid you not. She was like, it was on the middle. She was like, it was in the middle of my floor in my room.
That is amazing. That
Absolutely
is
amazing.
amazing.
So it just let me know. And I've had a reading after my mother passed away and had a similar experience and so forth. So I don't look at it as a practice. Like it's not something that I want to do, or I don't think I will ever do it again, because now I have an understanding and of knowing that they are with us. I know that a lot of times people, you hear, oh, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Or, and a lot of times that people say, well, they're still with you. And, no, they are. It's not a cliche.
Yeah.
They are still with you. So I live in this house. I have this big, beautiful house here in Texas, probably more of a house than I actually need, but and I spend a lot of time, but it's so peaceful, and I have my, I have my altar, so to speak. I don't have a true altar,
Mhm.
in the sense that, but I have their photos. I speak to them, I talk to them, and I feel their presence. And even this whole move, I know that they were in the midst of all of it. I felt them all in it because they, even though I said everything happened fast, there were some hiccups, when you're getting a mortgage and again, I had to, like, I bought this house before I even sold the house in New York. And, so, buying and selling a house and moving from different states, there was a lot of moving stuff going,
That's huge. That
around.
is
Yeah,
huge.
that was a
Yes.
huge, and it was a true leap of faith, but I felt their presence through it all. So I just, like, I just want people to understand that it's fun. I think the main thing that I want to leave with people is, again, we have to deal with the reality of death. It's not something that we want to deal with. But grief is a process
Mm,
that we're all supposed to go through. And you are supposed to go through it. I'm not telling anybody not to grieve. It's a process. Let yourself go through the process. It's not a process that's meant to last. It's not
yeah.
a process. It's not supposed to become a way of life. It's something that you work through, but not hold on to. And then it's all about changing your mindset and your perspective. And even if you don't want to, believe in what in terms of the medium and believing, you just change your perspective on it. And it's changing your perspective and understanding that, this is the natural order of life.
Yes.
And it's not something that we all want. It's not something that we want to deal with, but it's something that we have to deal with. And you have to change your perspective on it in in most cases. And I know, like with my mom, one of the other things I said, be screaming and crying and grieving over a woman who I had my whole entire life. When I had people, because of, like I talk about my best friend, and then I have a set of cousins who lost I have several cousins who have lost their mothers as children.
Yeah.
Like they didn't grow up with their mothers. They lost them when two of my cousins, their mothers died when they were babies.
Mm,
So now it's like, so I had to put things into perspective. I don't know why, but I was blessed not only to have a mother, I had a grandmother.
yeah.
And I had these women in my life for a lifetime. These women held my baby. So I can't sit here and just crawl up in a corner and just keep grieving and saying, and again, and like I had said before, I was like, you have to maintain your joy because that's
Yeah.
what life is. If you don't maintain some type of joy, and I think a lot of the cliche, a lot now everybody's talking about their peace, but it's all
Yeah.
in it's all connected. So I'm gonna maintain my joy. I've made a determination no matter what, and that life. And I know that there's a lot of things. We're gonna have to deal with a lot of turmoil. There's gonna be some moments of sadness and stuff in life, and that's a part of life. But no matter what, I'm gonna maintain my joy, and
Yeah.
I think that's important. I don't wanna preach, for me, my joy is it's rooted in my relationship with God, but wherever you can find it, you have to find that and maintain that, even in the midst of the storms. You gotta maintain that joy.
I gotta tell you that listening to your story, I'm rooting for your joy and your peace as well. I know
Mhm,
you said that you have found peace for yourself,
mhm,
but more than anything, I am very grateful that you were here to share this story. And by doing that, you beautifully honored their legacy to
yes,
be able to share that with all of us. The people that are listening to this episode right now may never cross paths
mhm.
with you in real life, but I really believe that they're going to take pieces of this with them. And I
I
hope
hope so.
it inspires them to
Yes,
go and spend time with whomever that person is. If
yes,
it's, the one that you're saying, I really should, I really ought to, just do it. Just
do
do
it.
it.
Just do it. Just do it.
Your story, everything that you have shared with us is living proof that this is all very precious, but at the same
Mhm.
time, to be able to have such rich time with them while they're here, when it is
Yeah.
time for that transition to happen, you're able to let go with peace.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so thank you, June. Oh my gosh, I appreciate you sharing all of this.
Oh, I'm so happy to share it, and then, like I said, I definitely felt compelled, to do it. I really did, and then just like you said, and I really do hope that it helps somebody. I really do. I really do. I hope it helps, this is something that I've talked about with my friends, on a regular basis and, friends and family. So, but I definitely hope it reaches a broader audience and it does help someone.
And one thing I will say, for the folks that are listening to this right now, with there's other elements of June's story. She's got plenty to share, but if you do have questions for her, whether it is making it through the grieving process, the story of the medium, which is a phenomenal story, by the way, please
What
leave
I
a comment, because I am monitoring the comments. June is going to be checking it out as well. I'm going to put her information in the description if you would like to drop her a message. But more than anything, if you could share this with other people in your life that are possibly struggling with this exact
Mhm.
same element in their lives. The whole point of this is that we bring you to a place of peace and that you are able to pursue your joy as well. But June, thank you so much for being here. We are very
Of
grateful with the
course.
whole podcast.
Yeah.
And I want to say that all of this, there probably 75% of this story I was hearing for the very first time. So I appreciate that I was able to experience it right along with the audience. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and not just in that, but yeah, from that small little conversation in the bookstore.
I
Yeah.
was like, I gotta have you tell all this to everybody. So this was
I
very rich.
know, and I hope we get a chance to have a conversation, like I mentioned to you that I am writing a book, not on grief or death. It's oddly on
Yes.
love, but just basically a love story of poems and short stories and so forth. But I hope to come back and to be able to talk about that. And that
Hey,
also, again, that's also part of finding my joy, even in the midst, because on top of all of us at this particular age are dealing with the death part component, a lot of us are also transitioning into either being widows or going through divorces and stuff like that. So that is something else that I feel very compelled to speak on, and that's a labor of my it's been a labor of love for the last couple of years. So I hope I get to come back and talk about that as well, and the book
yes.
finally being completed and published.
Hey, you've got an open invitation. We definitely want to hear it and
Yes,
celebrate with you when
yes,
it
but
happens.
yeah, yeah. But I'm so happy to have met you, and I'm grateful, and I know that
Very
that was
grateful.
again. I know that that was God at work.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Absolutely. So, everybody, as I said, please leave a comment for June if you have some questions or if maybe her story resonated with you. We would really like to appreciate what you thought of this whole conversation. But more than anything, like I said, share this with a loved one, share this with your midlife circle because we are all in this conversation together. But until
Mm,
next time, I will thank June on behalf of all of us here at the Melanated Midlife community. So please keep living your best midlife, and we will see you next time.
right.